Early June, in the Afghan desert. The wind swept across the dunes like the dry breath of some ancient being, carrying pale golden dust past the sun-bleached canvas tents of Forward Base, Echo 17. Everything was drowned in harsh light, still and desolate to the point where even the diesel-powered fan sounded like a nervous whisper. Behind the field kitchen, hidden among rusting supply crates, a low shadow moved close to the ground, slipping through as if it had done this 100 times before. Commander, a German shepherd, fur grayed and dulled by dust, ribs showing through a gaunt frame, crawled silently along the logistics corridor. He stopped, ears pricked, eyes narrowing. A strange scent floated in the air. Not food, not engine oil. Something sweet and sharp, pulling a memory to the surface. An odor of death he had smelled before. Somewhere, sometime. A command tent. A man with dark hair, a warm voice, and serious eyes. Michael. And that same scent had been there, just before the gunfire, before Michael collapsed, and everything fell to ruin. A faint sound. A small click, like a fork against porcelain. Commander turned his head. That was it. Colonel Jack Miller, 54 years old, was sitting alone in the command tent. He ate slowly, stiffly. Not out of enjoyment, just because a man still has to swallow something to keep living. A folding metal table pressed against the tent wall. On it, a stainless steel tray with a grilled chicken breast, white rice, and a few browning slices of apple. Next to it, a cup of water. No ice, no tea, no coffee. Jack hadn't touched coffee since the fire. Its heat made him choke, as if the final breath of his wife and daughter were rising back through that cup. He ate in silence, as if any sound from his mouth might make him fall apart. His hand held the fork stiffly, like a gun. His gaze passed through the tent flap. Empty. Commander crawled to the edge of the entrance. The ground beneath him was hot enough to fry an egg, but he didn't blink. He waited, measured, and decided. The two guards outside barely glanced his way, mistaking him for a stray. They didn't notice the difference, didn't see that Commander didn't move like a stray, but like a special ops soldier. Feet made no sound. Eyes scanned constantly. Breathing. Perfectly controlled. In a flash, Commander leaped onto the table, flinging the tray into the air. Chicken, rice, and water are scattered across the floor. The cup rolled, clanging loudly. Jack shot to his feet like he'd been hit. His chair toppled. His hand grabbed the Beretta on his hip, barrel aiming straight at the attacker. "What the hell?" His voice echoed across the base. The two guards burst in. Outside, soldiers eating lunch turned, tense. The commander didn't run, didn't growl, didn't lower his head. He just stood there, staring straight into Jack's eyes, with golden eyes that didn't waver. It was the kind of look only beings who'd survived dozens of battles carried. Resolute, unyielding, and in pain. Private Eli Brooks, a recruit walking by, heard the noise. He saw the food on the ground, and something made him stop. A white streak, not rice, not salt. He knelt and used his utensil to nudge it. A clump of fine white powder mixed with the meat juices. Frank Thompson arrived just then. The base's trusted veterinarian, once a member of the targeted relief force, sat beside Eli and quietly pulled a small biosample kit from his breast pocket. One drop of reagent hit the powder. The color turned instantly to deep indigo, indicating a high-grade neurotoxin. "Strychnine," Frank said softly. "A few grains is enough to stop breathing in under 3 minutes." Jack said nothing. His hand slowly lowered. The gun fell from combat posture. Something in his eyes shifted, like a long-standing stone wall suddenly cracking down the middle. He looked back at Commander. The dog still stood there, unmoving, eyes locked on him. Then Commander dipped his head slightly as if to say, "I'm not asking for mercy. I did what I was trained to do." Jack dropped to his knees. The entire base went silent. He wasn't a man who apologized, but that day He placed his hand on Commander's head and whispered, his voice rough as desert sand, "I'm sorry, soldier." No one clapped, no one cried. But everyone, from greenhorns like Eli to veterans like Frank, knew one thing. The dog they'd thought was feral and useless just minutes earlier had saved the commander's life. And maybe the entire base. Only one question remained echoing in Jack's mind. Who is this dog? And why is he here? Colonel Jack Miller rose slowly after touching the dog's head, but his eyes didn't leave him. For a moment, as if something inside had pulled him backward, a voice from the past, long silent, he turned away, pulled a military phone from his chest pocket, and spoke briefly. "Call the K-9 handling unit. Bring restraints. Potentially dangerous specimen." The words dropped like a stone in the tense, uneasy silence. Eli froze. Frank fell silent, head slightly bowed, as if he'd just heard a sentence passed without trial. The German shepherd stood alone in the center of the tent, sunlight streaming through a gap, casting a glittering trail of dust across his back. The commander didn't howl, didn't run, didn't bark. He just watched Jack, the gaze of a creature once trusted, now unrecognized. The K-9 team arrived 20 minutes later. 3 people in gray uniforms entered with long leashes, electric collars, and tranquilizer guns. One of them, a young lieutenant named Max, had served in the same campaign last year. He hesitated when he met the commander's eyes. "Sir, are we sure the subject is dangerous?" Max asked, glancing at Frank as if hoping for a protest. Jack didn't look at anyone. He spoke in a cold voice. "Unregistered. Breached command sector. Attacked superior officer's meal. Behavior unverified. Control unknown." Frank stepped forward, hand lightly on Max's leash. Dogs don't act without cause. They respond to command, to instinct from training, and I believe— His voice lowered. This one was trained very well. Jack turned to him. His eyes were dry, without anger. Only a hollow kind of emptiness. A man who has lost everything often has only one thing left: control. "You think I don't know military dog behavior?" Jack asked, not loudly. "I led a K-9 unit in Fallujah. I know what's acceptable. A dog doesn't storm a command tent, leap on an officer's table, and assault his food, regardless of motive." "And what if he was right?" Frank asked. Jack said nothing. As Max bent down, leash extended toward Commander. The dog stepped back half a pace. No growl, no fear, just distance, held like a soldier awaiting recognition. Eli suddenly spoke, his first words in half an hour. "Sir, I think you should reconsider this." "You're a rookie," Jack replied, still watching Commander. "Your job is to observe, not interfere with command." "I saw it with my own eyes," Eli continued, voice shaking but firm. "That dog didn't attack you. He saved you. He smelled the poison before anyone else. He didn't panic. He didn't harm anyone. He acted with purpose." Frank offered a final note. "I request ID verification. He could be a missing service dog." "And if he is?" Jack asked quietly. "Then what you're doing," Frank replied, "is sending a veteran to death row." Jack looked at Frank. A long second passed. Still he waved his hand. "Restrain him. Psychological and behavioral evaluation action pending results." The commander allowed them to fit the electric collar. But the moment Max gave the leash a light tug, the dog turned to look Jack directly in the eyes, and for the first time made a small sound, a soft whimper, warm and heavy with longing. No one else in the tent understood it, except Frank, and perhaps Jack felt something stir too, a sharp pang deep in his chest, quickly crushed by duty and reason. Commander walked out into the blazing sun, his long shadow etched into the sand like a silent trace of something once sacred, now cast aside. As Frank exited the tent, he caught Jack's eyes but said nothing. He left behind only one sentence. "It's not the dog who needs reevaluation. It's us." Commander was led away, his thin figure disappearing behind the tent flap, but the silence he left behind still clung to the base. No one said a word, but the exchanged glances, the subtle nods between soldiers, and even the unusual quiet of Jack, all hinted at something shifting, quietly but irreversibly. And the first to break that wall of silence was a soldier with a heart that had never learned to give up, Sergeant Frank Thompson. Frank didn't follow the K-9 unit. Instead, he returned to the field kitchen where it had all started. The spilled tray was still there. Bits of meat clung to the dusty ground. Rice scattered, mingling with the white powder. He knelt, this time not to examine, but to reflect. Not the sample, but the action. He didn't knock it over to eat, he said softly, as if speaking only to himself. He knocked it over to stop it. Frank wasn't a man prone to sentiment. He'd been a medic in Fallujah, then Syria, then Somalia. He'd treated hundreds of injured service dogs, some missing eyes, others legs. He knew the difference between instinctive and tactical behavior, and what Commander had done wasn't panic. It was calculated. Back in the medical bay, Frank powered up his old computer and accessed the archive of retired K-9 identification logs. He remembered the gait, the reflexes, the eyes. Something about Commander was familiar, as if he'd seen him before. But where? In an encrypted folder, Frank dug through old files from Operation Iron River 3 years ago, the same operation Michael Davis never returned from. Some photos had survived, even though the official file was marked missing in action. And then he stopped on one old photo. A young soldier, face dusty but eyes bright, resting his hand on the head of a German shepherd with fur nearly identical to Commander's. On the soldier's chest, a badge, Captain M. Davis, and on the dog's neck, barely visible, a scar trailing down the left jawline, the very scar Frank had touched hours earlier. He zoomed in and compared shoulder lines, forehead shape, and sitting posture. There was no doubt. Commander was the dog in the photo. Michael's dog. Frank shut the laptop, his hand resting on the desk, fingers trembling. Commander wasn't just a stray who'd saved an officer's life. He was a veteran, a survivor, a witness. And more than that, he carried a story that had never been fully told. The story of Michael's death. Frank didn't wait. He grabbed his jacket, slid on his glasses, and headed straight for the temporary holding cell for dangerous dogs. A small warehouse at the edge of the base, where animals deemed untrainable were kept. There the commander lay tethered by soft steel wire inside a plain metal cage. No water, no bedding, just a tarp and a bowl of untouched food. Frank stood outside, bent down. "Commander," he called quietly. The dog didn't respond right away. His eyes were half closed, breathing slow and steady. Not asleep, but watching and waiting. Frank opened the cage, sat down, said nothing more. He simply extended his hand, palm up, resting on the ground, just a hand's width from Commander. 1 beat, 2, then 3, and Commander shifted gently, pressing his nose to Frank's palm. No bite, no fear, just recognition. Frank whispered, "You didn't come here by chance. You came to finish something. And I won't let anyone stop you." That very afternoon, Frank walked into the command office, a printed photo of Michael and Commander in hand. He placed it in front of Jack Miller, who was standing by the window, watching the desert sunset burn red across the horizon. "This is Michael's dog," Frank said plainly. Jack didn't turn, but he took the photo, staring at it for a long time. Frank continued, voice lower. "You know he sent a distress signal a few days before he disappeared. And you also know the only one trained to return with that data in an emergency was Commander." A long silence. Jack lowered the photo. His eyes were no longer cold, but they weren't forgiving. Yet. "I used to think I had nothing left to lose," he said. "But that dog, he made me doubt myself." Frank nodded, eyes glassy. "Maybe that means there's still something worth holding on to." The night sky above Echo 17 was never truly dark. Thin silver moonlight spilled across the tent roofs, the warm yellow glow of guard posts blending into the heavy air thick with sand, engine oil, and cigarette smoke. But at the far edge of the camp, Where the forgotten storage sheds stood behind logistics, the light was different, subdued and cold, like the hearts of those too familiar with loss. Jack Miller stood before a dark steel door, hand on the handle, but didn't turn it. He didn't know why he'd come here at this hour. Maybe it was the photo Frank had left on his desk. Maybe it was the name Commander repeating in his head, like an old echo from a past he thought buried with the ashes of his family. Or maybe simply, he couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, something stirred in his chest. Not exactly emotion, more like old sediment shaken loose by a sudden breeze. The door creaked open. No one was on guard. No one believed a dog needed supervision. Inside, Commander lay still, head resting on his front paws, eyes half open but not looking at the door. He didn't bark, didn't rise, didn't show any signs of anger or resentment. He just breathed steadily, eyes slowly tracking Jack as if he had always known he would come back. Jack stepped in, quiet and slow, as though he didn't want to disturb anything. He stopped a few paces from the cage and knelt. Not in uniform, not armed, no insignia. Just a man. An aging man, hair graying from war and regret, sitting in a storage shed across from a being considered worthless in combat. He didn't know where to start. With the execution order from hours ago? The first time he met Michael Davis, the young officer who once saved his life in Kunar? Or the night he learned his wife and daughter died in a house fire that still lacked any satisfying explanation? Jack bowed his head. His eyes met Commander's, and for the first time, he didn't see an animal. He saw a soldier, a comrade, a witness, a loyal soul who had never abandoned his mission, even when those meant to protect him had turned away. "I used to believe loyalty was all that was left after the war," Jack said softly, as if afraid his voice might break the fragile thread forming between them. "But when family dies, when brothers fall, when trust is crushed by the very orders I gave, I'm not sure I know what loyalty even means anymore." Commander didn't move, but his gaze softened. Slowly, unhurriedly, he lifted his head, stood up, took a step toward the bars, and stopped. Jack extended a hand, not reaching into the cage, not calling, just laying his palm bare on the ground, open, silent. 1 second, then 2. No sound. Then Commander stepped forward and lowered his head, gently touching Jack's hand with his nose. Not quite friendship, not quite forgiveness, but a silent nod between two soldiers. "I never left you. I'm still here." A quiet breath escaped Jack's chest. Something broke inside him, not pain, but release. The letting go of judgment, of pride, of the rigidity that had nearly cost an innocent life. And he understood. Commander hadn't come for justice. He came to finish what his late handler, Michael, left behind. In the corner, under the soft glow of a hanging bulb, lay a small wooden table where Frank had left the old collar. A worn strip of black leather, faded with time, etched with the inscription, CDR 5593 M. Handler, Captain M. Davis. Jack stood, approached, and lifted the collar with both hands. It wasn't heavy, but it felt sacred, a relic not just of loyalty, but of a story still untold. He turned back. His eyes met Commander's again. No words, no cancellation order, no formal reinstatement. Just presence, just a shared look, just a silence, in which everything was already forgiven. Jack walked out of the warehouse. The door closed gently behind him. But that night, he didn't return to his room. He sat on the stone steps of the command building, arms resting on his knees, eyes lifted to the sky. Out here in the darkest part of the desert, the stars burned brightest. And for the first time in years, he sat still, quietly, without feeling empty. The next morning, as a faint mist still clung to the faded tent roofs of Echo 17, Frank Thompson knocked on the door of the command office with a folder tightly tucked under his arm and eyes heavy with truths too long unspoken. Jack sat by the window, one hand resting on a cold cup of coffee. eyes following a lone desert bird pecking the sand as if searching for something lost beneath time. He looked up when Frank entered. No invitation needed. The air between them had changed, as if the night before had been more than a quiet moment between man and dog. It had been the first step in reclaiming something they'd both abandoned: faith in life, in others, and themselves. Frank placed the folder on the desk and opened it slowly, not for dramatic effect, but out of respect, for the man who never came back, and for the creature still carrying that mission within him. "Commander," Frank began, voice low and steady. "Codename CDR 5593M, assigned to the Special Operations Unit, Vanguard Battalion. Direct handler, Captain Michael Davis." Jack didn't blink, but his jaw tightened. He had already known, but hearing the name again, confirmed from an official document, struck like a quiet, precise blade. "We served together in Al-Sham," he said softly. "Michael believed in ideals so fiercely I used to worry he'd die following a wrong order. But he never left anyone behind. Man or animal." Frank gave a solemn nod. "And he never went into the field alone. Commander was always with him. Records show the dog rescued 3 wounded soldiers from a bombing during Operation Snakebite. Then 4 IED refusals. Twice he led them out of an ambush zone. Every time Michael moved, Commander went first, scouting every bush, every broken brick. Never once letting his handler walk into death before him." Jack stayed silent. His hand withdrew from the coffee mug and curled into a fist, trying to grip memories too heavy to hold. Outside, the sound of helicopters thumped across the sky, but inside, time stood still, thick with recollection. 3 years ago," Frank continued, flipping the page. "Operation Iron River. Codename Black Echo. Michael led a team into a neutral zone to investigate an arms smuggling network. The official report says they were ambushed. Entire team KIA. No survivors. And no mention of Commander," Jack murmured, eyes drifting as if seeing that smoke-stained desert again. "I asked. I searched. All the records said the dog died with the team." Frank shook his head. Maybe that was just the assumption. But Commander didn't die. He survived. And for the last 3 years, he hasn't turned up at any training camp. Not on any adoption list, not at any outpost. Until yesterday, when he walked into your tent. No one spoke for a few minutes, but Jack's eyes were no longer dull. They held the distant glow of someone who had just found a missing shard of his soul. He exhaled slowly, then stood and stepped toward the tactical map on the wall. "Is there a grid reference for Iron River?" he asked. Frank pulled a slip of paper from the folder. "Yes, here. A demilitarized zone 45 kilometers southwest. Long sealed off. Entry restricted. Requires high-level clearance." "We're going," Jack said, like issuing a silent command. "I need to know how Michael died, and why it took Commander 3 years to return." Frank nodded, but his eyes lingered. "You know this could open a lot of things. Some truths you might not want to hear." Jack met his gaze, for the first time, with a softness that didn't mask pain. "I'm not afraid anymore. If someone didn't give up for 3 years, then I have no right to walk away now." Frank gave a slow nod. As he turned to leave, he paused in the doorway and added, almost like a whisper, "Commander didn't come back just for Michael. I believe he came back for you." Jack turned toward the window. Outside, Commander, now Rex, was being fed by a supply soldier. Calm and steady. No leash required. The morning sun caught his dusty gray fur like the sheen of time itself. And in those eyes, Jack saw something no language could describe. The loyalty that had survived the war, survived being forgotten, and was now waiting quietly for someone willing to finish the journey. Early sunlight cast a pale gold across the torn tents and cracked dirt yards of Echo 17. The wind whispered across the desert like the breath of secrets not yet told, quietly weaving through the corners of a base beginning its usual rhythm. But in a plain medical room, behind the logistics depot, 2 men and a dog stood before another kind of doorway, one that opened into a past no one had dared to revisit. And that might never have opened If not for the return of a survivor no one believed would come back. Commander, once known as Rex, his name during his special ops years, lay on the medical table, eyes open, alert but unresisting. Frank Thompson, the weathered veterinarian whose hands had stitched up more dogs than he could count, gently brushed aside the fur around Rex's neck, looking for what he and Jack had both suspected since the night before. Jack stood across the table, arms folded, watching Frank's every movement. But deep in his gaze was no longer suspicion. It was something closer to quiet grief, as if he were seeing the soul of Michael Davis rise again in every breath, every hair, every still moment in this dog's body. "There's a hard spot here," Frank said softly, bending closer, one hand steadying Rex's head, while the other traced a line along a hidden scar beneath the fur. "Feels like a thin piece of metal, flat, right under the bone." "Not a standard tracker chip?" Jack asked. Frank shook his head. No casing. No antenna. I've only seen this once, on a bioencryption project designed for ultra-classified ops. Experimental stuff." Jack stiffened. He knew that program. Michael had whispered about it once, cautiously. One day, when every device can be hacked, the only thing no one will question is a living memory. Jack had laughed then, and called it science fiction. But now, looking at Commander, those eyes too human, too deep, he knew it wasn't a joke. It was a mission. Frank took out a thin surgical blade and carefully shaved back the fur to reveal a scar about 3 centimeters long. Under the skin, faintly, a matte silver sliver of metal lay nearly flush with the flesh. No lights, no signals, just silence, the kind that screamed. "This design," Frank whispered, "matches the data caches implanted under the skin for top-tier Black Echo missions." "Michael led Black Echo," Jack said, voice heavy, "and Commander was the last data vault no one ever knew." Frank nodded, then pressed a biometric scanner gently to the metal. A soft beep sounded. The tablet screen lit up encrypted device. Ultra-classification access. Denied authorization required. Frank pulled a specialized tactical connector from his coat, a data key meant for strategic-grade hardware. He plugged it in. A soft click. The metal sliver vibrated slightly, and for the first time, a faint red line glowed along its edge, proof the device was still alive, still waiting for someone worthy to unlock it. On the screen, biometric dual authentication required. Unlock via code or matched biosignature. 3 failed attempts. Auto-destruct. Jack swallowed. Biometric key could be Michael, but he's dead. Frank paused, then said slowly, "It could be Rex. The scan might be coded to his DNA or neural pattern. If Commander was the carrier, he might also be the key." Jack looked at Rex, his eyes softening into something fatherly, something deeply human. "You carried this for 3 years. No one knew. You crossed borders, deserts, gunfire, even my doubt, just to bring it home. Why?" Rex didn't answer, but he didn't move either. Just lay still, head lifted, eyes steady on Jack, not afraid, not hopeful, just waiting, with a glint in those eyes, a light that said the mission had never ended. Frank lowered the tablet, extracted a temporary data module, and said, "We'll need a decryption chamber. This can't be opened casually. One error and it's gone. But I believe Commander will show us the way." Jack nodded, slowly, his eyes never leaving Rex, and within him, a truth began to take shape. If Michael had chosen Commander to carry his final memory, then whatever was inside this device wasn't just intel. It was something Michael knew no one would believe, unless it came from the loyalty of a dog. And now, Rex was back, carrying not just a fragment of metal beneath his neck, but 3 years of silence and instinct. Only one question remained. Who or what kept Michael from ever returning? Jack laid his hand on Rex's head. Not as a commander, not as a master. Just a man, offering a touch filled with reverence. "We're going all the way, you hear me? This time I'm not leaving anything behind." Rex blinked once, slow and sure. The kind of blink that said, I've been waiting 3 years for you to say exactly that. Echo 17 swallowed its secrets in silence, but the outside world wouldn't stay quiet for long. Less than 24 hours after Frank submitted an internal report about a classified military device discovered inside a service dog missing for 3 years, a UH-72 Lakota light military helicopter touched down on the makeshift airstrip just a few tenths away from command. Stepping out of the cockpit was a slim woman with a firm, purposeful stride, each footfall like the ticking of a stopwatch. Her hair was tied back, her face sharp, not hard but unwavering. Lieutenant Grace Turner, an intelligence officer from Strategic Security Command, carried a coded briefcase, a thick dossier, and a look that made it impossible to tell whether you were being helped or investigated. Jack saw her from a distance, straight-backed in the security zone. One handshake was all it took. He knew she wasn't here to file reports. She was here for answers, and ready to trade blood for them if needed. "I'm here under direct orders from the Department of Defense," Grace said, her tone precise but not harsh, as the three, Jack, Frank, and herself, sat around the command table. "The poisoning incident involving you 2 days ago might not have been random. The leak about a dog carrying classified intel got high-level attention, and when I saw the name Michael Davis, I knew this case was never truly closed." No one interrupted. Frank gave a short nod, laying the old photo of Michael and Commander on the table. "He didn't die because he failed. He had a plan, and this dog is the only part of that plan still alive." Grace turned to Jack. "You were the last one to hear from Michael before he disappeared. What did he say in his final call?" Jack spoke slowly. "One sentence. If I don't make it back, trust Commander." Grace paused, then looked at Rex, sitting beside Frank, obedient but watching each person in the room with unblinking focus. She leaned forward, didn't touch him, only observed. "I served with a K-9 unit in Syria. I know the look of a dog who's lost his team. They don't look like this, unless they've seen something no human's been brave enough to face." Rex tilted his head slightly. Grace allowed herself the faintest smile, her first since arriving at Echo 17. Jack opened the cloth pouch holding the data device retrieved from Rex's neck. "This is why you're here." Grace put on gloves, examined the device, and confirmed, "End-gen biological encryption drive. We've only tested 3 prototypes. If Michael took one into combat, it means he was carrying something far too dangerous to fall into anyone's hands. Not even allies." Frank interjected, voice low. "We haven't opened it yet. The warning's clear. 3 wrong attempts and the whole thing self-destructs. 1 misstep and it's all gone." Grace nodded, her eyes now calm but focused. "We're not guessing. We wait for Rex to open it." Jack blinked. "You think a dog can unlock a classified data device?" Grace turned to Rex. "I don't think. I know. Some of our black projects linked encryption to living beings, through biometric rhythm and unique neural response. If Commander has carried this for 3 years without triggering self-wipe, his biology is the key." A silence fell over the room. Rex sat still, steady as stone, as though he knew all along he was being discussed. It was a strange moment. An aging commander, a veteran field medic, and a sharp young intel officer, all waiting for a sign from a creature who couldn't speak but knew more than any of them. Then, as if to respond, Rex lifted one paw and placed it gently on the edge of the table, where the device lay. He didn't scratch. He didn't grab it. Just a touch. Enough for the biometric scanner to activate. A faint light blinked. Then silence. And then text appeared. Biometric confirmation. Activated. "Hello, Michael. If you're gone, I trust Commander knows who to give this to." Everyone froze. Jack went still. Frank bowed his head. Even Grace, the woman made of steel, blinked once. She turned to Rex, her voice soft. "You didn't come back alone. You came to tell a story they tried to bury." Rex didn't respond. Just sat there, his eyes calm as a desert before a storm, ready to reveal what no one else dared touch. No one spoke as the final words faded from the scanner screen. In the quiet room, only the hum of a ventilation fan and the even breathing of Rex could be heard. Steady, like a compass pointing true north in a storm of uncertainty. Grace quietly entered the next code sequence to unlock the second layer of encryption. On screen, a simple military seal appeared, followed by text. Personal message. Captain Michael Davis. She took a breath and glanced at Jack. He nodded silently. She pressed play. The screen dimmed, then lit with the flickering image of a military tent. The video was low-res, glitchy, but the face was unmistakable. Michael Davis, younger than the man remembered, but with exhaustion already etched into his eyes. He didn't look heroic. He looked burdened. "Jack," he began, his voice hoarse, like he hadn't slept in days. "If you're watching this, I didn't make it back." Rex, sitting close beside Jack, lifted his head slightly at the sound of his old handler's voice. No bark, no whimper, just a movement so small, and yet anyone could see. He remembered. Michael's eyes dropped for a moment, perhaps glancing at Rex off-screen, then returned to the lens. "My team and I are investigating an arms and chemical smuggling operation, believed to be moving through the military itself. One of the shipments, according to intel, was sent directly to a border unit, Echo 17. Grace furrowed her brow. Jack held his breath. "We've discovered a high-level mole in the chain of command. He's been manipulating weapon transfers and testing a new compound on soldiers. This chemical disrupts neural balance, damages decision-making, and forces soldiers into psychological withdrawal, marking them as unstable and removing them from operations. The perfect way to eliminate resistance inside the ranks." Frank swore under his breath. Grace clenched her jaw. Michael looked down. His eyes are red. "They'll kill me. Maybe not now, but soon. I couldn't stop it all. But I've encrypted everything. Logs, maps, names, into this biological drive. The one Rex is carrying." He turned briefly, stroking the dog beside him, just out of frame. "If Rex survives, he'll return. He knows the way, and he knows the only person I trust to hold this is you, Jack." His gaze locked with the lens. No fear, just steady, solemn trust. The same look Rex had given Jack that night in the tent. "Don't let them be buried with me," Michael said, his voice almost breaking. "And if I'm gone, don't let Rex be alone. He's the last witness to the truth." The screen went black. A faint click ended the video. No one spoke. Each of them swallowed something thick, rage, sorrow, helplessness. But only Rex remained steady, proud, unmoved. No cry, no growl, no sign of strain. He simply walked to the table, sat beside the device, and straightened his posture, like a soldier awaiting orders. Grace was the first to break the silence. "If what Michael said is true, and I believe it is, then what we have isn't memory. It's living proof, and someone will want to silence us before we access the rest." Frank exhaled, eyes on Rex. "If Commander didn't abandon his post for 3 years, then it's time we stopped turning away too." Jack stepped forward. He knelt in front of Rex, laying his hand on the dog's head. Not as a superior, not even as a human over the animal, but as someone humbled. "Thank you," he said, voice tight with emotion. "No one should have had to carry this weight for so long. But you did what none of us dared to do." Rex closed his eyes, a slow blink, a silent acknowledgement. Then, without a word, he rose and walked out the door. Grace blinked, surprised. "Where's he going?" Jack watched the dog's silhouette disappear, his voice low. He remembers where it all began. No one asked another question. They just followed. While the rest of them still hesitated between fear and truth, only one being had already chosen a path forward and never looked back. As the encrypted data inside the device began to unlock, layer by layer like dust being swept from forgotten pages, the temporary logistics room transformed into a space where memory collided with the truth. Next to the old wooden table, Rex lay still, not sleeping, barely moving, but his eyes followed every flicker on the computer screen with unwavering focus. Something within him seemed to stir. Not instinct. Memory. Grace Turner, always precise and guarded in every decision, moved silently through the files left by Michael Davis. Each folder, each section, was a rushed message, a single link in the chain of warnings Michael had tried to send with the last of his remaining time. When she opened the section titled Internal Logistics, a list unfolded like a map of the entire operation. Names, ranks, timestamps, transfers, and risk assessments. She skimmed through quickly until her eyes stopped cold on a single bold line. Malone, Vincent, Major, Logistics. Potential mole. Known to have diverted weapons inventory. Temporarily evaded charges. Grace didn't say anything immediately. She quietly extracted the file, printed a hard copy, and placed it in front of Jack Miller. Jack squinted, staring at the name for a long moment. Then he exhaled, voice tight. "I've heard that name before. A few years ago we lost a crate of FNX pistols and anti-armor gear. The inventory came up short, but the officer in charge was Malone," Grace finished, cold as stone, "and he was reassigned to Echo 17 right before Michael disappeared." Frank tapped the table. "I remember that. There were rumors. But by the time anyone filed a report, the records were clean, like nothing ever happened." Grace pulled more logs from Michael's data. He marked Malone as the blind spot in the transport chain. Malone had sole control over inbound and outbound transfers. If the toxin reached Echo 17, no one else could have made that happen without him. As they spoke, Rex rose from where he'd been lying and walked slowly toward the table. His ears pricked slightly. His gaze stopped on the printed name, Malone. He didn't growl, didn't bark, but his entire body tensed. His stare drilled into the paper like it remembered something that still burned. Frank looked up. "Jack, look at Rex." Jack turned. His eyes met Rex's, and something inside Jack surged. "You know that name, don't you?" Rex didn't move, but after a few breaths, he turned and walked to a small window, looking out toward the motor pool. He stood still, watching someone pass behind a parked truck, a figure no one else noticed. Except Rex. Frank stepped closer. He saw Malone, maybe even that night. Grace wasted no time. She pulled up the personnel archives from the base server. Malone was no longer stationed at Echo 17, but the logs showed 2 deployments, one just before Operation Black Echo, and another just a month later, listed as a technical recovery mission. She opened the post-deployment audit report, but the screen blinked red. 404, file not found. No data, no paper trail, nothing. Grace clenched her fist. Someone erased Malone's record. Jack gritted his teeth. And whoever had the power to do that isn't on our side. Frank turned back toward Rex, who was still by the window, eyes distant, fixed on a place only he seemed to remember. Some piece of memory lost in a dusty desert. Grace walked over and pulled a printed photo of Malone from the central database. She quickly printed it, then held it out toward Rex. "Do you know this man?" Rex stopped, tilted his head slightly, and then, from deep in his throat, a low, sustained growl. Not vicious, not out of control, just contained, controlled, and full of memory. The room fell silent. Jack placed a hand on Rex's shoulder, his voice hushed. "He hasn't forgotten, and I'd bet that man was the last one to leave Michael's tent alive." Grace folded the photo and slid it into her chest pocket. "We need emergency clearance to retrieve Malone's root files. And if I'm right, someone's going to try to stop us." Jack looked out the window again. Not at the base, but far beyond, where war no longer smelled like smoke, but like betrayal. "And this time," he said slowly, "we have a witness who speaks through memory." Rex lifted his head, gaze steady as stone. He didn't need to speak, didn't need proof, because in his eyes, the truth had always been there, just waiting for someone brave enough to see it. The night wind whistled through the barbed fences, carrying the dry scent of dust and engine oil that clung to every inch of Echo 17. But in that familiar air, something had shifted. Not in the system, but within the people who once believed they had understood everything. Since Vincent Malone's name resurfaced in Michael Davis's data, Jack hadn't slept. Vague dreams, shapeless echoes, sounds without source, like a countdown ticking in his mind, leading him to face something he had long chosen to ignore. He sat at the window of the temporary command post, staring into the black stretch of the logistics yard. And then, in the dim light spilling from a far-off supply shed, he saw Rex. Still unmoving, gazing in one direction. No barking, no twitching, just looking. There's a kind of silence that terrifies me, and a kind that forces you to act. Jack pulled on his jacket and quietly called Frank. No explanations, no plan, just instinct. And that was when Rex turned and began walking, like he'd been waiting for this moment for 3 years. They crossed the logistics yard, down an old, narrow path between 2 storage blocks, once the arteries of supplies, equipment, and forgotten truths. Rex led slowly, deliberately. Every step was a question Jack had to answer with memory. They stopped in front of a rusted metal door on the west edge, a small, unimpressive building dwarfed by the massive warehouses, once a field medical depot, now forgotten. Rex stood there. He didn't sniff, didn't bark. He just stared at the handle, ears up, body taut, like he was waiting for a command, or for someone he once knew to return. Frank tested the door. It's unlocked. That's odd. This building's been sealed for 2 years. I signed that order, Jack whispered. But now I'm not sure what I sealed, and what I didn't. Inside, darkness. Jack flicked on his flashlight. The beam swept across dust, empty crates, and old desks. But it didn't feel abandoned. Something in the shadows was still breathing. Rex led them to the far corner. There, under a tarp, lay 3 military-grade steel containers. No markings, no tags, no seals. Jack peeled back the cover. The first container, when opened, released a chemical stench. Sharp, nerve-thinning agents mixed with preservation alcohol. Frank leaned in. This is the banned spinal destabilizer, outlawed 3 years ago. It causes memory disruption, reflex failure, the exact symptoms Michael described. The second box held strange weapons, mostly unmarked guns, prototype silencers, and rare ammunition. The third held files. Logistics slips, falsified manifests. On one document, under Internal Receiving Officer, was written, Major V. Malone, Echo 17, 14 September. Jack gripped the paper. That date was the night Michael disappeared. The same night Jack had been told Michael had gone off mission. Alone. Frank picked up another file. He didn't go missing. He was made to disappear. Jack didn't speak. His hands trembled slightly. Inside him, a wall, built over 3 years from logic, grief, and silence, was beginning to crack. Rex stepped forward, resting his head lightly on Jack's knee. No demand, no blame, just presence. He trusted me, Jack said, voice almost breaking. Michael trusted me, and I didn't ask. I let it all fade away, thinking war could bury the answers with the dead. Frank placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. It's not too late, not as long as the living are still looking. Outside, the wind picked up. In the distance, the low whir of a training chopper cut through the night. But in that quiet warehouse corner, all sound gave way to a single moment, where 2 soldiers and 1 dog stood facing a truth too long ignored. Jack stood slowly. He stroked Rex's head. Thank you, he whispered, for not letting me forget, and for coming back when I still had the chance to make it right. Rex closed his eyes, blinking once, slow and deliberate. He didn't need words. In his world, loyalty was a language you didn't teach. You just lived it. The rusted hinges shrieked as the hatch door lifted fully, revealing a narrow staircase that swallowed Frank's flashlight beam. Cold air surged upward, heavy with the scent of rusted metal, mildew and something sharper, the acrid tang of explosives that made the air hard to breathe. Jack held his breath. Frank carefully shone the beam downward while Rex stood behind them, ears up, body taut like a drawn bow. Without command, Rex took the lead, each step steady and silent, like he'd walked this path before. Or perhaps he had smelled the truth lingering down there long ago. "Let Rex go first," Jack whispered. "If there are mines, he'll know." Frank nodded, his eyes locked on the unwavering form of the dog. The tunnel beneath the logistics depot was tighter and lower than expected, but far longer, 15 meters at least, running beneath half the warehouse. The walls were lined with dark old bricks, loose wiring dangled, and a few dim bulbs still flickered to life. There was still electricity. This place wasn't abandoned. It was kept alive, quietly, like a decaying heart still beating in secret. They turned into a small side chamber, barely larger than a maintenance closet, and both Jack and Frank froze. Before them sat a series of sealed wooden crates, high-grade military containers, stacked neatly under heavy green tarps. No dust, no cobwebs, no signs of age. Only the cold precision of someone who knew every inch of space and what needed hiding. Frank pulled back the tarps. Underneath, Claymore mines, C4 bricks, Semtex, and a shock-proof bag containing remote detonation gear, tech only issued to Black Ops sabotage units. "Jesus!" Frank took a step back. "This is a demolition stockpile, enough to level the entire base." Jack stood in silence, the flashlight casting deep shadows across the worry lines on his face. "How long has this been here? And what were they planning to do with it?" They searched further. In the corner, a wooden crate bore a lead seal. Frank broke the lock. Inside, unregistered assault rifles, no serial numbers, and 3 sniper rifles with silencers already mounted. Next to them, a case of tactical maps, marked zones inside Echo 17 and nearby supply routes. Rex moved to one of the larger crates, sniffed thoroughly, then scratched lightly, not at the smell of weapons, but at the scent of a human. Jack and Frank opened it. Inside, a worn combat jacket, torn at the wrist, stained with small, dry specks of blood. In the chest pocket, a snapped ID tag. Most of the name was faded, but 2 letters remained, sharp and clear. MD Frank's breath hitched. Jack dropped to his knees, holding the tag in his hands. Michael. The jacket had once belonged to him, and it wasn't forgotten. It was kept, like a trophy, or proof of a meticulously executed crime. "Michael was brought down here," Jack murmured, his voice distant. "They didn't kill him in battle, they finished him beneath the very base he swore to protect." Rex sat still, eyes fixed on Jack. Not howling, not dramatic, just bearing witness. And in those eyes, Jack saw the pain that had survived. The pain of someone who had seen everything escaped alone and carried it silently for 3 years. Frank pulled Jack up. "We need to call Grace, right now." Jack nodded. But before turning, he knelt and stroked Rex's head. "You didn't just bring us here. You carried this secret, alone, in the dark. No one to speak to, no place to go, just memory." Rex lowered his ears, then gently leaned his head against Jack's knee. Not out of habit, not as a trained response, but simply to be there, a soul that had waited all this time to be believed. They ascended from the bunker with the evidence secured in their packs. Night had fully fallen. The desert wind howled louder. The moon was pale. But inside them everything had grown clear. Echo 17 had once felt like a haven, but it had become the origin of a fracture. And Rex had come back, not to expose it with vengeance, but to keep the truth from dying with his handler. As Rex looked up into the black sky, Jack understood something for the first time. Darkness isn't for fear, it's the test of courage. And Rex had stood in it, alone, for 3 years, waiting for someone brave enough to join him. The afternoon at Echo 17 burned red, steeped in the harsh color of the desert. The sun slanted low, and sand swept into the cracks of rusted containers, covering the base, so familiar with sound, in a strange hush. But something was off. Frank Thompson was the first to sense unease when Jack decided to proceed with the routine patrol, a mission that, in truth, was just an excuse to inspect the sensor array on the eastern perimeter. But now it had become the perfect gap, an open space where any incident could be masked as a technical error. Rex, as always, was Jack's silent shadow. No commands, no leash. He knew his role. Not just a dog, but a second pair of eyes for someone still learning to trust his own. As the jeep pulled away from the main complex, Jack looked over his shoulder and saw Rex staring intently at the horizon. Not barking, not wagging his tail. Just silent. Silence is full of warnings. Frank muttered, "Feels like we're walking straight into where they want us to go," Jack replied, quietly. "And Rex is telling us that by staying quiet." The patrol post lay in a rugged patch of terrain, tucked behind a ridge of rocky hills. Once, this route had been removed from active duty maps due to unstable ground, but today, oddly enough, there had been a signal interference alert, and 2 unfamiliar soldiers from the new support unit were assigned to accompany the mission. Nothing obvious to refuse, and that was the most frightening part. When the jeep halted at the ridge, Rex suddenly perked up. He sat straight, body tensed like steel wire, eyes locked on a brush patch roughly 50 meters to the left. He let out a low growl, not loud enough to startle, but clear enough for Jack to understand. There's something there. Someone. Armed. Jack reached toward his belt, toward the sidearm holstered there, but before he could touch it, gunfire erupted. The jeep jolted violently, tipping as bullets slammed into its flank. Jack was thrown into the passenger seat, head striking the door. Frank shouted, clutching his shoulder. Shards of glass flew as the windshield cracked. 3 figures in camouflaged uniforms emerged from both sides, automatic weapons equipped with suppressors, moving fast and precise, like trained operatives. A roar echoed. Not human. Rex, no orders, no hesitation, no waiting for backup. He launched from the vehicle, a streak tearing through red dust, straight at the nearest attacker. His leap wasn't wild. It was practiced combat, body low, weight driven back, then springing forward like a coiled machine. The soldier collapsed under the weight of the assault. Rex didn't bite to kill. He clamped down on the man's wrist, locking his arm and forcing the weapon to fly out of reach. Without pausing, he twisted sharply, let out a loud snarl, and hurled himself at the second attacker just as the man aimed his gun at Frank. The second man was quicker. He drew a knife, but Rex was quicker still. A sudden turn, low to the ground, followed by a side bite to the waist, sent the man stumbling. The knife slashed across Rex's shoulder, leaving a deep cut. Blood spurted, but Rex didn't stop. Crimson spread across his ash-gray fur. He growled and charged again. The third attacker backed off in panic, fumbling for a smoke grenade, but by then, Frank had rolled out of the jeep, gun in hand. 1 shot. 2. The third man dropped. The jeep hissed with the smell of scorched oil. Dust swirled. The wind whipped across the hillside. And in the middle of it all stood Rex. His body trembled. Blood poured from his shoulder. 1 ear was torn. His eyes squinted with pain, but he stood firm. No whimper. No retreat. Jack dragged himself out of the jeep, stumbling toward him. "Rex, Rex, you're hurt!" Frank ripped off his jacket and pressed a clean cloth to the wound. "It's deep, but it missed the artery. We need to stop the bleeding, now." Rex panted, tongue hanging out, exhausted but alert. He turned his head toward Jack. Their eyes met. No words were needed. "I'm still here. I saved you. Just like I once saved Michael." Jack gently stroked his head, his hand sticky with blood. The blood of a creature once exiled, once sentenced to die, now lying here, alive because his loyalty had never cracked. "You're a soldier," Jack whispered. "No, you're the last thing between us and the dark." Frank scanned the ridge. "Malone knows. He's found out we uncovered the weapons stash. This was his first warning." Jack clenched his fists. "No, this was evidence, and Rex is the living witness he can't kill." Rex slowly closed his eyes. Not from pain, but from peace. He had completed the mission Michael left behind. He had saved his commander, not just his life, but his trust. When the medevac helicopter arrived, Jack never let go. He cradled Rex's head in his lap like a fallen comrade returning from a place no one believed had a way back. Malone could erase files, silence men, but he couldn't erase Rex's bite, from the record, from Jack's memory, or from those who thought the truth could be buried. Rex never asked for medals. He only wanted one thing: to be trusted again. And now, in a desert painted with blood and smoke, he had earned that with his own. Encryption room. 3 sat hidden behind a thick corridor of concrete, where radio signals faded and conversations slowed to a murmur beneath the hum of machines running day and night. Grace Turner sat alone, the screen's glow casting a faint blue on her still face. Her eyes were locked on the data device extracted from Rex's neck. No one knew how it worked. No instructions, no signals, just a small metal shard, buried deep beneath gray-silver fur, like a fragment of belief sealed away with time. It took her 3 days to crack the first layer of encryption. The next 4 required more than technical expertise. They demanded emotion. Michael Davis hadn't encoded this with logic. He encoded it with trust. The final layer appeared like a memory game. 3 name strings, 3 sequences, and 3 symbols. Only when she typed the first letters of Miller, Turner, and Davis did the data open. A tiny icon appeared. L18.5. A video. Grace leaned in, barely breathing. Her fingers trembled as she clicked the icon. The screen went black, then revealed a soldier seated in a field tent, dim light casting shadows across his weary features, deep eyes locked on the camera. Michael Davis. Behind him sat Rex, smaller but already with that familiar stance, composed, alert, loyal. He was pressed close to Michael's shoulder as if he knew he was witnessing the last of something. A voice began, quiet but crystal clear. "If you're watching this and you're not Grace Turner or Jack Miller, then know that I'm dead. And I don't want my death to be just another forgotten period in this army's silent history." Grace swallowed hard. Her eyes were wide, fingers gripping the edge of the keyboard. Michael stared into the lens. "Malone is a traitor. I have proof he's running illegal weapons across borders, using Echo 17 as a relay hub. But that's just the surface." He lowered his head, breathing fast, then looked back up. "I followed him for nearly a year. The moment I got close, they reassigned me. No one believed me. No one protected me. I realized then, this system isn't broken. It's controlled." Michael gently touched Rex. His voice softened. "I won't live long enough to expose him. But I trust Rex. He won't betray. He won't hesitate. He'll guard this data with his life." A long pause. Then Michael gave a faint smile, pained, half hopeful. "Jack, if you're watching, please don't do what I did. Stay silent. Don't let honor be exploited. Don't let Rex die again like me." The camera wobbled slightly. The wind brushed the mic. Then Michael said his final words. "If I'm gone, let Rex lead you to the truth. He's the last living memory of me." The screen went dark. A single white line appeared. Transmission ended. Grace sat motionless. Her lips trembled. Her heart pounded like she'd run miles. She pulled the USB from the port, her palm slick with sweat. Everything Michael had said she'd suspected. But now it was real, vivid, undeniable. He knew he would die. But he didn't give up. He didn't take the truth to his grave. He gave it to a dog. She stood, walking out like a sleepwalker. In the hall, soldiers passed. Papers fluttered from ceiling fans. But for Grace, the world had shifted. She went straight to the medical bay. When she opened the door, warm yellow light fell on silver-gray fur lying still on a steel bed. Rex was breathing steadily, one shoulder wrapped in white gauze, eyes gently closed. She sat beside him quietly. No need to call. Rex opened his eyes, not fearful, not tired, just calm. She laid her hand on his forehead and whispered, "You kept your promise, Rex. You brought him back. You protected what no one dared believe still existed." Rex stirred slightly. His tail tapped the bed. A single, soft thump, like a nod. Behind her, footsteps echoed. Jack Miller. He said nothing, just stood against the wall for a long moment, eyes resting on Rex, as if he were seeing Michael from years ago. The soldier who once sat beside him on the front lines. The man who had died, and still lived, in the gaze of a creature that remembered. Jack stepped forward. Saturday placed a hand on Rex's head. "He trusted me," he murmured. "Even when I betrayed that trust, even when I ordered his death, he came back, to save me, to remind me that the truth doesn't die just because we abandon it." Rex didn't move, but in his eyes, Grace saw something. A quiet forgiveness, free of judgment. A broken man, a woman trying to redeem the past, and a dog carrying a dying wish, all sitting together, in a room without gunfire or orders, only the sacred silence of trust returned to where it belonged. Rex didn't need words. He had lived to prove what Michael had always believed. Loyalty needs no oath, only a heart that won't give up. After the quiet hours by Rex's bedside, Grace and Jack returned silently to the encryption room. They brought with them the storage module from Rex's neck. This time, not a message or final words, but a raw video file embedded in a side module. Grace wasn't sure what it held, but Michael had said, "Rex will show you what words cannot." It wasn't just a metaphor. She opened the file. The screen lit up. A shaky, ground-level view, bobbing with movement. The footage came from the combat gear camera mounted on Rex, something Michael had trained him to wear for their last mission. Jack stood behind her, silent. When the audio kicked in, a chill ran down his spine. "Rex, check the rear. No satellite. We're flying solo, old boy." Michael's voice, clear, alive, familiar. Then the camera panned as Rex turned. Michael came into view, smiling faintly, cradling his M4, back against a rock wall. Moments later, gunfire. Michael turned and fired back, panting. In the chaos, the camera caught two figures emerging from the ridge. One of them, Captain Logan Pierce. Grace leaned toward the screen. Jack froze. Logan, who'd fought beside Michael in Mosul, who'd cried at Michael's memorial, who always said, "He's the reason I'm still alive." In the video, Michael turned back, his voice shocked. "Logan? What are you doing here? I thought you were—" A gunshot cut him off. Blood burst from Michael's shoulder. He collapsed, skull hitting a stone. Rex growled and jumped back, but never left. He pressed himself to Michael's side, eyes fixed on Logan. Logan stepped forward. His eyes held no hatred, no rage, just cold, as if he had chosen what and who to discard. "I'm sorry, Mike. You knew too much. And I made my choice." He raised his weapon to finish it, but a new volley rang out, from an unknown source. A small explosion lit the opposite side. Logan's team turned and fled. Rex remained by Michael. He lowered his head, licking Michael's face. Blood darkened the soil. The camera cut out. Grace ended the video. The room went still. Jack sat down, gripping his knees. In his weathered eyes, something cracked. Not from surprise, but from the ache of failing, again, to see the traitor standing beside him. Logan. He was the first to hug me after Michael's memorial. His voice broke, each word carving into him. Grace said nothing. She stared at the black screen, the last image of Rex shielding his master in his final moment. No barking, no fleeing, no fear. "He stayed," Grace whispered. "He didn't run. Even knowing he couldn't stop a bullet, he stayed." Jack nodded, sighing. He saw Michael's killer and carried that memory for 3 years. Alone. He turned to Grace. "Logan killed Michael and stood beside me for 3 years. trained soldiers, led memorials, called Michael a hero to hide the blood on his hands. Grace's tone hardened. Malone is a snake, but Logan, he's the knife. He knew Michael, understood him, and that's why he killed him in the cruelest way. Betrayal. Rex sat by the door. He had entered when the video ended, uncalled, unguided. He looked at Jack, not with resentment, not with bitterness, but with something that nearly broke Jack. Expectations. Jack knelt and placed his hand on Rex's forehead. I see now. I understand, Rex. I let Michael's killer live as a hero. But you didn't let the truth die. You held it, carried it, endured it, for 3 years. And now I swear, I'll bring it to light. Rex lowered his ears, then gently leaned his head against Jack's chest. A soft rest. A nod. A partnership without words. Grace stepped forward, her hand on Jack's shoulder. We need a plan. Malone won't act alone, and now Logan knows we have the footage. Jack stood, eyes blazing. Then it's time to stop reacting. It's time to end this. Rex turned toward the door. The desert night stretched wide beyond. Dark, thick, but now a sliver of light had begun to cut through. And as always, Rex was ready to step into it first. As Rex silently turned to look down the dim hallway, the weak light from the encryption room still glowed behind him. Grace watched him, a strange feeling rising in her chest, as if the dog didn't just understand, but somehow sensed what was coming. Jack Miller couldn't wait any longer. Barely minutes after viewing the footage from Rex's body cam, he had already drafted the emergency report. The data, images, and video excerpts were compressed into a military-grade encrypted drive, accompanied by Michael Davis's personnel file, Grace's witness statement, and even Jack's journal, documenting the last 3 days of the covert investigation. It all pointed to one urgent demand: initiate a high-level criminal inquiry into Captain Logan Pierce and Major Vincent Malone. He sent the report to the command of Region 7 and called his direct superior, General Richard Holbrook, a man who knew exactly what Michael once meant to him. The voice on the other end came after a few rings. Cold. Calm. Too calm. Miller, I've received the report. Thorough, perhaps a bit too thorough. Jack exhaled. Then you understand. We need an internal investigation now. I'll take full responsibility if I overstepped. Silence. Then Holbrook spoke, slowly. I'll say this once, and only once. If you ever mention Malone or Pierce again on any official channel, you'll end up like Michael Davis. No explanation. No attempt to soften it. Just one sentence, cutting like a blade through the hope that had barely begun to flicker in Jack's chest. He froze, phone still in hand, but his mind was yanked back to 3 years ago. The night he got word of Michael's death. The hollow stare of Logan Pierce at the funeral as he laid a hand on the coffin of the very man he had murdered. Do you understand? Holbrook pressed. A dog, a blurry video, and a retired old soldier can't bring down this machine. Jack clenched his fist. You're covering up treason. Holbrook chuckled, a sharp, mocking sound. I'm preserving stability. And if you want to live to see retirement, do what Michael couldn't. Know when to stay quiet. The line went dead. Jack stood still for a long moment. Sweat dotted his forehead, even though the air conditioning hummed steadily. At the door, Rex stepped in, as if he sensed something was wrong. He approached quietly, sitting next to Jack, eyes locked on his tense, pale face. Jack sat slowly, a trembling hand resting on Rex's neck. He could feel the steady breath, the heat, and the strong heartbeat beneath the gauze on Rex's wounded shoulder. A heartbeat still pulsing amid the war between silence and truth. They know everything, Rex, Jack said, his voice thick as smoke. Not just know, they've chosen the wrong side. And now they want to kill even the memory. Rex nudged Jack's hand gently. No barking, no movement. That simple gesture nearly broke Jack. 3 years ago, he let Michael fight alone. Now he was watching Rex stand against an even greater enemy, an entire system complicit in betrayal. Grace entered, holding a copy of the decrypted data. She didn't need to ask. Jack's face said it all. They refused? Jack shook his head. Worse. They threatened me, warned me to stay silent, just like Michael before he was shot. A long pause. Grace looked at Rex, then back at Jack. Then we don't have a choice. We act, outside the system. No waiting for approval. We make it all public. Jack nodded slowly. But first, we get Rex to safety. They won't let this dog live long enough to reach a courtroom. Not if they realize he's the living evidence. Rex perked up at the mention of his name, his eyes filled with more understanding than most people could muster. He turned towards the door as if already prepared to move. Grace spoke softly, her voice hoarse. I have someone in airport logistics. If we move now, we can get Rex on a military cargo flight out of Echo 17 in the next 12 hours. Jack rose. Then let's do it. I'll keep Malone occupied. You protect Rex, at any cost. Rex pushed himself to his feet, his wounds still raw. He walked quietly beside Grace, as if he'd chosen a new handler, one who would help him finish the promise he once made to Michael. As the door shut behind them, Jack watched their figures disappear, pain rising in his chest. He had once signed Rex's execution order. Now, he was betting everything to keep him alive. One dog, one video, one dead friend. That was all they had, and it was enough to start a war. A crescent moon rose over the edge of the outpost, casting a faint bluish glow across the dry ground. Desert winds cut sharply through the eastern concrete corridors, carrying the uneasy air of a night without peace. In the pale shadows, Rex walked beside Grace like a second silhouette. Silent, steady, but no longer carefree. He seemed to understand everything. He could feel Grace's quickening pulse, the way she gripped the leash tighter, and how she kept glancing over her shoulder, even though no one was following. Or not yet, anyway. The military transport truck waited in the logistics bay, swallowed by darkness. The driver was a low-ranking soldier Grace had once saved in an operation outside Kandahar, a man who knew when to ask questions and when to just follow orders. Only 50 steps remained. Grace counted them in her head. Just 50 more, and Rex would be out of Echo 17, away from the eyes desperate to erase a living memory. But step 49 never came. A cold click echoed overhead, then floodlights snapped on from both ends of the corridor. Footsteps thundered in, metal clanked against plastic, and a voice, smooth, sharp like a blade already sharpened, Ursa rang out. Miss Turner, I believe we need to have a conversation. Grace turned. Standing at the center of an armed unit was Captain Vincent Malone, once her commander, now the walking image of betrayal. Malone wore a full uniform. No fake smiles. His face was blank, like a verdict already signed. According to military medical records, this dog, codename CDR-5593M, callsign Rex, has been officially deemed unfit for duty due to acute animal PTSD. Symptoms include aggression and lack of control. He held out a document, red stamped. Beneath a forged signature was the transfer order. Rex was to be sent to Combat Animal Disposal Station 6B. Grace froze. You falsified records. Malone didn't answer. He nodded to two soldiers wearing rubber gloves. Seize him. Rex growled softly. Ears perked. He sensed danger, but he didn't lunge, didn't retreat. He stepped forward, placing himself between Grace and the approaching threat. A simple act, but it made everyone pause. No one had taught him that. It wasn't training. It wasn't instinct. It was loyalty etched into his blood. Grace placed a hand on Rex's head. She trembled, but her gaze didn't leave Malone. You're afraid of him, aren't you? A dog carrying a dead man's memory, enough to make you shake? Malone gave a cold smile. No, I'm not afraid of the dog. I'm afraid of fools who think a grainy video can take down an entire system. Rex's growl deepened as the soldiers moved in. One held a tranquilizer syringe. The other circled behind Grace. In the flickering light, she saw it clearly. If she didn't stop them now, Rex would be caged like an animal. And this time, there'd be no tribunal. She shouted, "Stop! I'm a military intelligence officer. Per regulation, no one can act on a living piece of evidence without a court order." Malone shrugged, calm and ready. The order was signed at 22:04 by General Holbrook. Living evidence? No, just an unstable animal, like Michael once was. Declared unfit. The words struck Grace like a blade to the chest. Rex, sensing the shift, stepped forward, growling low, but the first dart hit. Left leg. He flinched, head jerking, their eyes blurred, but he remained standing. The second shot hit the old wound, the right shoulder. Rex collapsed, but before falling he turned his head, looked at Grace. No hatred, no fear, just a deep, silent gaze. "I kept my promise. Now it's your turn." Grace burst into tears. She dropped to her knees and cradled his neck. Salt and blood mixed on her face. "I swear I won't let them kill you. I swear, Rex, I'll get you out of here." But hands pulled her back. Rex was lifted onto a stretcher, head limp, body still. Yet he radiated the quiet dignity of a warrior who had foreseen the end. Malone turned without a word. The transport doors slammed shut. At that moment, the only sound left in the desert night was the low growl of an engine, carrying a living memory away from the place once called a battlefield. Grace stood alone. The wind howled, but she didn't move. Because in that instant, she knew this wasn't about Michael or Jack or lost footage anymore. This was about Rex, a dog betrayed not once, but twice. And there would not be a third time. That night, as the transport vehicle quietly took Rex away from Echo 17, a piece of Grace was torn away with him. She stood still, watching the red taillights fade into the darkness, not speaking, not breathing, only the desert wind shredding through her thoughts. At that moment, an unspoken vow was made. No announcement was needed. Rex would not be left behind. Not again. At dawn, Grace walked into the old logistics room where Jack sat alone, holding the Michael Davis case file, his eyes vacant, staring at a wall he had tried to break through for years. "They've taken Rex," she said flatly, "to disposal station 6B. In 48 hours, he'll be processed like a piece of obsolete war gear." Jack didn't ask how she knew. They both understood. Grace never let someone go without keeping watch. He nodded slowly, then looked up. "We can't let that happen." A voice spoke up behind them. It was Frank Thompson, the combat medic who once discovered the poison in Jack's rations. No one knew how long he'd been standing there. "I know the northern access point to 6B. Security is only tight during the night shift. If we go during the morning turnover, we'll have a 12-minute window to get in and out." Grace glanced at Jack. "If we get caught, there's no forgiveness waiting for us." Jack gave a crooked smile. "I don't need forgiveness. I need justice." They needed one more person, someone fast, discreet, able to pick locks without leaving a trace. The answer came from the unlikeliest source. Private. Eli Brooks, a quiet, unassuming young soldier who always placed fresh flowers at Michael's grave, even though they'd never met. Grace found him after lunch, alone in an empty training room. "You studied mechanics?" she asked. Eli nodded, and accidentally entered a few locked places. His voice was soft but steady. "What do you want?" "To save a life, a dog's life. If that's not worth your help, say no now." Eli paused, then spoke slowly. "I had one. Back in Afghanistan. Left behind because of missing paperwork. If I have the chance to do right by another one now, I'm not saying no." The plan came together in under 5 hours. Frank handled light sedatives and disguised the vehicle as a medical transport. Grace coordinated data entries into Station 6B's system, inserting a false record for delivery of defective blood samples, which was their entry cover. Jack would stay in contact from a distance, ready to take all responsibility if things went sideways. Eli had just one job: unlock Room 7 in the Class C Animal Disposal Wing, where Rex was being held. At 3:27 the next morning, The vehicle rolled out of Echo 17. Inside the van, no one spoke. The oxygen pump hissed steadily, counting down the 48 hours Rex had left. At 6B, everything went according to plan. The side gate opened slowly. Sleepy guards on the night shift didn't bother checking thoroughly. The van rolled into the biological sample bay. Frank navigated it right up to room 7. Eli jumped out first, scanning the access panel with a miniature flashlight. 2 code layers, old, but annoying, he muttered, fingers moving fast. Grace stood behind him, one hand gripping a concealed pistol beneath her medic coat, eyes locked on the door. Click. The lock was released. The door swung open. The smell of disinfectant, dried blood, and breathing. Rex lay in the corner of the room, chained to a steel table leg. A fresh shave on his neck indicated he'd undergone a final inspection before disposal. He lifted his head as the light hit him, eyes wide, ears flat. And then, when his gaze found Grace, he leaped up, no command, no hesitation. Rex lunged forward, the chain yanking him back. Grace sprinted to him, slashing the chain with a surgical blade. As her arms wrapped around him, he let out a soft whine, a sound filled with pain and release, like a final piece of his mind finally unbound. "I'm sorry I'm late," she whispered. But there was no time. An alarm sounded from somewhere down the hall, likely triggered by unauthorized door access. Frank shouted, "Go, now!" They ran. Eli led the way through maintenance tunnels he had mapped out. Jack, over the radio, called out security unit positions as they moved. The chase began. Footsteps thundered behind them. Flashlights swept the tunnels. Dogs barked. Sirens wailed. But Rex didn't fall behind. His wound hadn't healed, but he ran. He ran for one reason: trust. They made it to the van as gunfire erupted behind them. Frank floored the gas. Rex collapsed between Grace and Eli, panting heavily but never taking his eyes off the road ahead. No one spoke. No one needed to, because the truth had escaped the cell, and this time it would not be silenced. Engines roared through the fury of a desert windstorm sweeping in from the west. Gray skies churned with thick, rising dust, visibility shrinking minute by minute, as if nature itself wanted to cover what was about to happen. Rex lay across the back seat, head resting on Grace's lap. His breaths were heavy but steady, eyes not quite closed, just quiet, tracking every movement like a seasoned soldier who'd seen too many fronts. The bandage on his shoulder had started bleeding again after the grueling overnight escape. Jack drove the second vehicle behind them, a hard drive in the passenger seat holding everything. Rex's footage, Michael's final message, forged documents pinned to Malone. He was headed to an independent command unit outside of Holbrook's reach, a place where, he hoped, justice still had cracks wide enough for truth to slip through. He hadn't once asked himself if he'd survive. To Jack, it didn't matter. If the data reached someone who cared, that was enough. At exactly 11:12 a.m., the storm hit full force. Red dust swept across the sky, tearing apart familiar horizons and swallowing the world in a curtain so thick even sunlight surrendered. Both vehicles slowed. Headlights were useless now, except for one thing: showing the enemy where they were. Grace's worst fear was confirmed moments later. Gunfire. The first bullet shattered Jack's windshield. The second grazed the rear tire of Grace's vehicle. They were ambushed. Malone hadn't waited for clear skies. He'd planted trackers on Jack's vehicle earlier, then waited for the storm, the moment when satellites failed and distress signals jammed, to strike. 3 unmarked military trucks descended from the south like wraiths. No lights, no calls, just one mission: end it. Jack screamed into the radio. "We're compromised! Split up! Grace, get out of the wind zone!" But signals were already breaking up. At the same time, Grace's van was struck in the rear. The impact sent it spinning, slamming into a dune ridge, twisting halfway before coming to a stop. The next few seconds played like slow motion, screaming, grinding metal, and Rex growling as he hit the side of the van. Grace jolted awake first. Blood dripped from a cut on her face. Eli had slammed into the rear door, forehead bruised. Frank had lost his weapon. But what shook her most was Rex. He wasn't lying still this time. He was standing, eyes wide, ears sharp, body taut like a bowstring pulled to its final notch. No barking, no snarling, just pure alertness, gaze locked on the open door. And just as Grace turned to grab her gun, she didn't see the bullet. She heard the distinct whistling, felt a shove from the right. Rex had leapt. The bullet tore through his left flank. Blood sprayed in a thick arc, soaking the already dark fur that had endured so many wars. Rex collapsed to the van floor, limbs twitching. A soft whimper. Not loud, not desperate. Just a sigh, like someone who had done their part. Grace screamed, diving to him. She pressed hard against the wound, her hands shaking as blood pooled between her fingers. Rex didn't close his eyes. He looked at her. A stubborn, defiant, forgiving stare. I did what I had to. Now it's your turn. Frank scrambled over, snatching the med kit. I need to stop the bleeding. I need a clamp. Eli held the door, firing toward the vague silhouettes in the storm. Jack's voice broke over the radio. I'm almost there. Cover the south. I'll block their flank. They surrounded Rex, like protecting the last living witness to a time when conscience still mattered. Grace tore her shirt into a bandage. Frank administered morphine. Rex panted, not struggling. Still, trusting. Outside, the gunfire faded. One side withdrew. The other couldn't press forward. The wind still howled. The sand still scraped glass. But inside that van was something more fragile than life itself. Hope. Jack arrived, flung the door open and froze. Grace held Rex in her arms. Blood pooled around them like fate painted in red. He knelt, laying his hand on Rex's head, staring into those loyal eyes one last time. You're not an animal, he whispered, voice breaking. You're a soldier. You're my friend. And I swear I'll bring you home. In the dim starlight, Rex's eyes slowly closed, but never left their faces. He had completed his mission. Again, with his body. No one dared to breathe too loudly, because each breath now was a prayer. Each look toward Rex a promise still waiting to be fulfilled. And in the storm outside, where sand blanketed all, lay a life caught between death and survival, still guarding the only thing no power could steal: loyalty. No one could remember exactly how they managed to keep Rex alive that night. Jack drove like a man in a trance, nearly snapping the handbrake as he forced the Humvee through the gates of an abandoned field hospital on the edge of a deserted base. Frank stayed awake for 11 hours straight, never once leaving Rex's side, dressing wounds, stopping the bleeding, and maintaining fluids. Grace sat motionless beside Rex the entire ride, eyes wide, lips silent, as if any moment of distraction might cause him to slip away from this world. And Rex, though battered, drenched in blood, with a heart barely flickering like a candle in the wind, survived. No one dared speak it aloud, but they all knew. He wasn't alive out of instinct. He was alive because something was unfinished, something deeper than duty, deeper than truth. Grace knew exactly what that was. Once Rex stabilized, Grace quietly left the field hospital and returned to the abandoned command cabin in the gray zone, the same place where she'd extracted the data hidden beneath Rex's collar. But this time she wasn't just carrying the hard drive. She was carrying questions no one had dared ask. Why did Michael want the data sent to Jack? Why was Jack, no longer on active duty, a target in the silencing campaign? Digging into the raw data files again, Grace traced internal communications from 3 years ago, when Michael was still alive, and the first signs of Malone's treachery were surfacing. In an unencrypted file, she found a short journal entry. If I don't make it back, Jack must know. He's the only one I trust not to let this die. Beneath that line was a draft report, never sent. The connection had been severed abruptly after a fire broke out in civilian Zone B, the fire. 3 years ago. Grace sat upright, her heart pounding. Not because she was unaware of the incident, but because its timing aligned perfectly with the day Jack lost his wife and daughter in what had been reported as a gas leak explosion at his home on the outskirts of the base. She reopened the security files from that period. A massive fire. No survivors inside the house. The official conclusion stated, an explosion triggered by a gas leak and a spark from the kitchen stove. But something in the photos caught Grace's attention. Scene evidence revealed trace amounts of hexogen, a high-powered military explosive commonly used in missile warheads. It had no reason to be present in a civilian residence. Not unless someone had deliberately planted it there. Digging deeper into weapons inventory records, Grace uncovered the most haunting detail of the entire investigation. 3 years ago, a shoulder-fired SA-19 missile had been reported missing during an internal transfer, under the direct supervision of Major Vincent Malone. No follow-up report, no investigation. The missing unit had been resolved by falsely relabeling its transport code. And just 2 weeks after that entry, the fire happened. Grace sat still, the dim glow of the monitor casting a pale light across her face, which had turned ghostly from rising fury. She understood now. The fire was never an accident. It had been an execution attempt. Someone had tried to kill Jack, not because he was the intended target from the start, but because Michael had chosen him, the one person he trusted to carry the truth if he didn't make it home. Malone, in a desperate bid to eliminate all threats, had chosen the fastest and most brutal method: wipe out the possibility altogether. By the time Grace returned to the field hospital, dawn was breaking. Jack sat silently beside Rex, running a gentle hand over his blood-stiffened fur. No words passed when she entered the room, but when she laid the file down in front of him, his eyes locked on it, instantly hardening. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. It wasn't an accident, she said. Jack closed his eyes. His entire body went rigid. For 3 years he had lived under the weight of guilt, believing he had left the gas on. What if he had just come home 10 minutes earlier? Everything would have been different. Now the truth revealed something far more cruel. His wife and daughter hadn't died from a tragic mistake. They had died because Michael had trusted him. At that moment, Rex stirred. A faint whimper escaped him. Grace leaned in. His eyes opened, cloudy, but aware. When they met Jack, neither looked away. Between them now, it was no longer just the quiet bond of man and dog. It was something heavier, a shared, wordless pain that ran deeper than blood. Jack reached out, fingers brushing softly over Rex's head. His voice was gravel, weighed down by years of buried grief. You knew, didn't you? About Michael. About me. About what they tried to bury. Rex didn't make a sound. He blinked once, and that was enough. After Grace placed the final set of documents on the table, no one in the room said a word. Silence settled like the thick ash after a great fire, the residue of truths once suppressed, of losses that could never be undone, of a friendship pushed to its absolute limits in the name of doing what was right. Jack stood silently beside Rex for a long time. His eyes stayed dry, but the pain was etched into every line of his weathered face, like old battle scars carved deep into his skin. He gently stroked Rex's head, fingers brushing the swollen scar on the dog's left shoulder, and said in a low, raspy but unwavering voice, "If you're still alive after everything they did, then I don't have the right to stay silent anymore." The next morning, all the data went public. Jack, Grace, Frank, and Eli, with quiet support from a handful of high-ranking officers who still believed in integrity, simultaneously released the encrypted files to major news outlets, international human rights organizations, and an independent Army counterintelligence unit. In less than 6 hours, headlines erupted across the world. U.S. military insider runs weapons smuggling ring and internal assassination scheme. Surviving war dog reveals explosive truth. Public reaction was immediate and furious. Lawmakers called for an emergency investigation. A full-scale internal audit was launched, independent teams began tracing missing weapons, unlogged equipment, and accidental deaths, mapping it all. Every lead pointed to the same center of gravity: Major Vincent Malone. But when the official arrest warrant was issued, Malone had already vanished from Echo 17. Security staff confirmed he'd left the base the moment the news broke. No luggage, no trace, using a fake ID to bypass the gate. Grace, monitoring internal comms around the clock, detected a military radio signal triggered near the temporary helipad in the eastern zone, an area once used for strategic logistics, accessible only by high-ranking officers. While the counterintelligence unit scrambled to respond, Jack got there first. He stepped out of an armored vehicle, not in uniform but wearing an old, faded jacket, the kind Michael used to wear during field training. At his side walked Rex. The dog's wounds hadn't fully healed. His left leg still limped, gauze still wrapped around his ribs. But Rex stood. He refused to stay behind. Not when Jack called. Not when the footsteps of the man who'd destroyed so much were trying to vanish into the desert like a ghost. The helicopter was already running. Malone hurried towards the steps, phone pressed to his ear, sweat soaking his brow. But then a bark echoed through the dust. Not loud, not panicked, but clear and deliberate. He froze in his tracks. Rex emerged from the shadows, his eyes glowing bright through the swirling dust. Jack walked beside him, unarmed, and with just one sentence, he made everything stop. "Where do you think you're going, Malone? You think you can outrun the gaze of a creature that remembers every trace of gunpowder you ever handled?" Malone raised his gun. His hand trembled. His eyes darted like a trapped animal. But then Rex growled, not with hatred, but with the gravity of something that had seen too much. And Malone's hand dropped. The counterintelligence team arrived moments later. Malone was handcuffed. The helicopter was disabled. In the official report that followed, one note stood out: no casualties. The detainee made no eye contact with anyone, except a single dog, just before he was taken away. Rex didn't bark again. He simply sat down beside Jack's feet, breathing steadily, eyes half closed. Not from fatigue, but because he knew. The worst was over. He had fulfilled what Michael entrusted to him. He had followed it through, with blood, with pain, and with a loyalty that needed no instruction. When Grace arrived, standing beside Jack and Frank on the red, dusted airstrip, no one said a word. But in their eyes, for the first time in years, there was no anger, no grief, only peace, the kind only those who dared to pay the price for justice could ever know. The morning after Malone was taken into custody, the atmosphere at Echo 17 was eerily different, as if something fundamental had shifted. Public outcry showed no sign of slowing down. International watchdogs were now questioning military oversight procedures, and gates that had long remained shut were being forced open under immense pressure. In a temporary field clinic set up on the edge of the base, Rex lay quietly on a white-covered mat, his breathing still labored but gradually more stable each day. Grace sat beside him, typing the final lines of an internal report to the Joint Disciplinary Council, while Jack stood by the window, staring out at the empty tarmac where the helicopter Malone had tried to escape in still sat motionless. They thought every truth worth knowing had already been uncovered, but the device still fastened around Rex's neck had never been just a data drive. When Grace asked the cryptographic team to unlock the final layer of security on the device, the intelligence officer assigned to the task paused for several seconds before speaking. "This isn't a random identifier," he said. "This is a top-tier clearance code assigned to a Tier 1 military canine asset." Grace leaned closer, eyes scanning the screen now fully decrypted. The designation read, Commander CDR-1A-K9, Tactical Asset, United States Special Forces. Vital Code, Alpha 1 Red. Status, MIA, Missing in Action. Last update, 3 years ago. Grace and Jack were speechless. They looked at Rex, who was still lying there with eyes half closed, as if even he understood that, For the first time in 3 years, he had been called by his true name. No longer just Rex, the stray, the infiltrator, the living piece of evidence, but Commander, the highest-ranking silent warrior among special units. He had once led over 70 tactical assault missions, had saved Michael and his team at least 4 times, and had been honored in records that were never meant to see daylight. And now, after 3 years presumed dead, Commander had returned, bringing with him the truth, the proof, and most of all, the gaze of someone who had never bowed his head. Jack stepped forward and sat beside him, hand resting on the old scar on Rex's left side, the same spot nearly taken by a recent bullet. He looked into the dog's eyes, and this time, it wasn't as a commanding officer, nor as a man burdened by mistakes. It was as someone who had lost everything and was now finding, perhaps, the one thing still whole. A soul that had endured loss without breaking. "Commander," Jack whispered, "you made it back. None of us deserves you more." In the days that followed, Rex's true identity was made public. The Department of Defense released a statement confirming that the commander had been listed as missing during a classified mission after his unit was ambushed, and his handler, Captain Michael Davis, was killed in action. No one ever expected a dog to survive alone in enemy territory, hunted by corrupted comrades, and erased by the very system meant to protect him. But Commander had done the impossible. He had lived, endured, and come back carrying the truth. As word spread, veterans who had once served alongside the commander began to share their memories. One recalled how the dog once intercepted a vehicle packed with explosives, saving the entire platoon. Another told how he never ate until permitted by his handler, no matter how hungry he was. And Michael, who had loved him as more than a partner, but as family, had once written in his journal, "If I don't make it home, I know he'll know where to go." The day Rex, now rightfully known as Commander, left the clinic, Grace walked him out into the soft light of the early afternoon. He limped, but walked proudly. Soldiers stood on both sides of the path, no orders given, no words spoken, just straight backs, raised hands, saluting the return of a warrior. And when Commander stopped at the center of the yard, gazing up into the clear blue sky as the breeze ran through his once ragged coat, Jack spoke softly. "We owe him a name, a truth, and a future." After the welcome ceremony for Commander faded and the applause died down under the afternoon sun, Jack sat alone outside the field hospital. Beside him, on an old wooden bench, lay Rex, or rather Commander, stretched out with his head resting on Jack's leg, just like the very first days they met. In the hush of the late breeze, Jack came to a realization no one else had voiced. The truth had come to light, but the pain etched into creatures like Commander, faithful, resilient, and too often forgotten, still lingered, quiet, deep, unseen. That night, Jack wrote the first lines of a project he never imagined he would pursue. Second Chance Command, a sanctuary for military dogs who were abandoned, wounded, or left behind. A place where they can live again, not as tools of war, but as living beings with memory, soul, and the right to be healed. The words were simple and blunt, but they carried a piece of his heart. For Jack, this wasn't just repayment to Commander. It was a long overdue apology to every silent life that had never even been given a name. When he presented the idea to Grace, she stared at him for a long moment before nodding. "No questions needed." "I'll coordinate everything," she said. "But more than that, I want to build a program that connects these dogs with veterans suffering from trauma, like Rex did with Michael, like how he saved me." Frank, who had spent half his life saving human lives, quietly added, "And I will learn to save a few four-legged friends. I'll be the lead vet if you'll let me start from scratch." 6 months later, on the grounds of the once-abandoned Echo 17 base, a small complex rose again under a modest but hopeful name, Second Chance Command. The old barbed wire fences were replaced by green hedges. The cold training rooms were turned into recovery spaces with natural light, soft music, and warm bedding. In the wide sand pit at the center, Commander could often be found sunbathing peacefully, surrounded by younger dogs, many of them abandoned after the war, bearing wounds of both body and spirit. Jack never called him a mascot. He called him a guide, a living example of what it means to recover from loss, to possess strength without weapons, and to lead without words. The commander didn't train the other dogs with commands. He simply existed, and it was that presence alone that made the trembling ones, those who flinched at the sound of boots, take their first steps forward, sniff the doctor's coat, or let a human hand rest gently on their heads without fear. Grace designed a special program pairing recovering dogs with PTSD veterans, especially those who had lost their emotional compass after the war. Frank launched a training track just for nurses to learn canine physical therapy, because an injured leg deserves as much care as a broken heart. And Eli, the young soldier who once flung open the clinic doors in a panic, now led the rehabilitation unit for dogs that had been discarded. He never raised his voice, only whispered, stroked each one gently, and waited patiently as they relearned how to trust. Commander, through all of it, did nothing dramatic. But whenever a new dog arrived, he would approach quietly, lie down, and let them take in his scent. Some barked, some hid in corners, but not a single one could resist his gaze for more than 3 days. And when the children of visiting soldiers came to the center, they always ran to him first, petting his back, asking his name. And when they heard Commander, their eyes widened, thinking it was something out of a cartoon, never knowing the dog before they had survived both battlefield and betrayal, just to sit here waiting for a hug. On an early autumn morning, as dark leaves began to fall gently across the yard of Second Chance Command, the sunlight streamed through the hallways like a whisper. Grace received an urgent call from the West Recovery Wing, the section reserved for female military dogs undergoing treatment. The dog in question was Sienna, a German shepherd rescued during a cross-border relief mission near Syria, where Grace and Eli had served early in the center's international outreach efforts. Sienna had arrived at the center, exhausted, belly swollen, eyes wild with fear, unwilling to let anyone touch her, except Grace and Commander. From the very first day, Commander had approached her without barking or growling. He simply lay down a few feet away, his gaze calm, as if to say, "You're safe here. No one will hurt you anymore." From that moment on, Sienna began to eat regularly, sleep peacefully, and even let Frank examine her. Within just 3 weeks, she trusted the center like it was home. No leash, no commands needed. Just the gentle presence of those who had also survived the war. That morning, when Grace rushed in, Eli and Frank were already in place. Under the soft golden light filtering through the round ceiling window, Sienna lay in a bed of clean straw, breathing steadily, her eyes half closed but aware. Next to her, Commander was already there. Nobody knew when he'd come, resting his head on his front paws, silently watching the vet's every move like a quiet guardian waiting for a miracle to happen. And then, in that quiet morning, without warning or fanfare, Sienna gave birth. 5 puppies, tiny and wet, their breaths ragged as if they had just fought their way through the entire world to get here. The room fell silent as Frank gently cleaned each one and placed them beside their mother. 4 of them had dark gray coats, like Sienna, but the 5th, the smallest, bore a faint white star on its forehead, a soft brush stroke of fur that looked almost painted on. When that puppy tried to crawl, weak but determined, not toward Sienna, but toward Commander, both Grace and Frank were speechless. The Commander didn't move. He simply lowered his head, his nose barely touching the puppy's. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but in that sacred silence everyone could feel it, as if an old soul was whispering to a new one. "Go. You'll go farther than I ever could." When the puppy opened his eyes, unfocused, still adjusting, and lifted his tiny head for the first time, The light hit his forehead just right, making the white star glint like a sign. Eli whispered, "Look, he looks just like Rex." But Grace didn't nod. She leaned down, cradled the puppy gently, and kissed his head. "No," she said. "He looks like Michael." The room exhaled, as if breathing out for the first time in a year. The name, spoken only through glances and silence until now, rang out like a new song. And just like that, the name was decided. No votes, no debate. The puppy would be called Michael, a reminder that life continues, and the right things are never truly lost. From that day on, Michael, the puppy with the white star, became the center of attention at the facility. Commander often lay beside Sienna's nest, never overbearing, but rising the moment a soft whimper was heard, checking each breath. Grace quietly documented every detail in her journal. And Jack, who still carried Michael's last letter in his shirt pocket, watched from nearby with one of his rare smiles. In Michael, he saw not just an old friend, but every piece of hope war had tried and failed to erase. 6 months after Michael, the white-starred pup, was born, Second Chance Command held its official inauguration. For the first time since the idea had existed only as a vague sketch on an old wooden desk, the center was complete. The recovery wing, the training zones, the trauma therapy rooms, family interaction spaces, and most importantly, the silent memorial garden. A small grove of lavender where wooden plaques bore the names of dogs who had served and fallen, without ever receiving a single medal. On the day of the ceremony, the media was present, but there were no interviews, no stage, no script, just silence and honest presence, per Jack's request. He wore his old uniform, faded by time, but pressed sharply like the day he first put it on. Commander walked beside him, back straight, ears alert, though his gait had slowed, the old wound in his rear leg still catching now and then. Yet even so, he carried the weight of a history that couldn't be measured in numbers. As Jack stepped up the wooden platform in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by a circle of people, he didn't look at anyone. He simply reached down, patted Commander's head gently, then let the dog sit beside him while he looked toward the field where the puppies were running free, including Michael, now stronger, mischievous, but still with that strange calm whenever he glanced toward Commander. Jack picked up the microphone, no script in hand. His voice wasn't loud, but each word carved the air. "Once I ordered a dog to be executed because it knocked over my food bowl." The crowd went still. Jack paused. "And that bowl tipped over my whole life." He looked down at Commander. "Because if it hadn't, I never would have known it was poisoned. I never would have known that the dog I saw as disobedient was, in truth, a living legend. I never would have learned that my best friend Michael had entrusted the entire truth to this four-legged soul, and I never would have had the chance to make things right if Commander hadn't survived and come home." Jack walked slowly in a circle, each step touching a memory. We often give dogs a role, to guard, to fight, to protect, but we forget they also carry memory, pain, and a love that doesn't ask for anything in return. Commander was once sentenced, wounded, shackled, and stripped of everything he loved. But he never blamed anyone. He never lashed out. He just kept doing what was right, in silence. Jack turned his gaze to Michael, the young pup tugging at a rope toy near the training area, occasionally looking back at Commander, and continued, softer now. "And today, as I watch a new generation rise from the things we thought we lost, I understand justice doesn't always come on time. But if we don't give up, it does come." When Jack returned to the Commander's side, he bent down and unclipped the old name tag from his collar, the one engraved, "Colonel Jack Mercer, retired." He fastened it around Commander's neck, right next to the dog's military tag. "You're the last teammate I've got," he said. "And the reason I'm still standing?" The courtyard fell silent. No one clapped. No one spoke. At that moment, a breeze swept through the lavender garden, carrying a fragrance so gentle it caught everyone off guard. Above them, Under the clear blue autumn sky, children, kids once shattered by war, now healing at the center, ran laughing through the courtyard alongside the young dogs. It was a sound Jack hadn't heard since the day he lost his family. It was the sound of life. Commander remained seated, eyes gently closed, as if he too could feel what humans call peace. He didn't need to run. He didn't need to howl like he once did, lost in the desert. Because now, at last, this place was home. Sometimes something as small as a tipped-over bowl can begin a journey no one saw coming. From a dog wrongly condemned, Commander became a living symbol of loyalty, justice, and survival amid war and shadows. But above all, he proved that what's right, even if late, can still be done. If you were in Jack's place, would you have had the courage to trust again, to believe in a creature once doubted? Tell us what this story meant to you in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you believe Commander's journey deserves to be shared, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because some lives, even without words, can teach us what loyalty truly means.